Let me sort of like show you how we got where we're at today with some of the stuff that has gone down today. Africa, and you can see the size of it, and Europe, you can see the size of it. Then one would say, how did this little group of people beat this big group of people? First of all, this big group of people didn't invade this little group of people with an intent of killing or destroying them. Indeed, didn't invade them at all. But this group of people invaded this group of people with the intent of killing and destroying them. In the 1890s, there was a big conference in Europe. Anybody know what that conference called? It was a conference on Africa. It's called the Berlin Conference. When you study Africa, you will find that the First World War was fought over Africa, and so was the Second World War. Of course, you'll be confused, and somebody will tell you the Second World War was fought over the Jewish presence in Europe. That's not true. What happened to the Jews was a historical incident, but that's not why the war was fought. They'll tell you the First World War was fought because somebody shot the Duke of Austria, and in the history book, that lie is perpetuated, the shot that was heard around the world. Have anybody ever heard the shot that was heard around the world? And you know about the shooting of the Duke of Austria? Have anybody ever explained who shot him to you? Have they ever explained to you why the Duke was shot? Have they ever explained why shooting this Duke would start the First World War? They just throw it out there. The shot heard around the world, the killing of the Duke of Austria, and somehow that is equated to being what started the First World War. But no one goes back to the 1800s. And no one goes back to the white missionaries all over Africa who's posing as missionaries but sending back logistical information on what river is the best and most navigable, where is the mineral, the geologists they are sending back, where is the mineral resources. Others are saying, what is the best farmland, and so forth and so on. So in 1890, they decided to invade Africa. And what should be called the First World War takes place starting in the 1890s with the attack on Africa from the north by the French, from the northeast by the British, from the Horn by the Italians and the French, from the west by the Spanish and the Portuguese and the French and the British, from the central west by the Belgians, from the south by the Dutch and the Finns and the Germans, and from the east and southeast by the Germans. All of them attacked Africa simultaneously, and it is not even referred to as a war. Have you all ever had the story of this war in history? Have anybody ever talked about the Berlin Conference and what it meant? Were you ever told about the struggle for Fashada, which is a point on the Nile River, this bend down in Sudan, where the fork goes into Sudan and into Ethiopia? Did they ever explain, while the British with the Arab Egyptians began to invade the Sudan, the Italians began to invade Ethiopia, the French invade Morocco and Algeria, the Spanish invade Mauritania and what is now called Sahara, the French invade what is Senegal, Mali area, while the Portuguese invaded what is part of Guinea area, while the British invades, again, what is Nigeria and Ghana, and the German invades what is Gabon, Congo, and Angola, and Namibia, but the Portuguese controls Angola, so the Germans had to run down to Namibia. In the course of all of this, when the fighting was finished and the bloody wars had been fought, the Germans was left with the short end of the stick. Notwithstanding, they had called the conference in the first place to cut Africa up between the Europeans. But now Kaiser finds himself cut out of the deal by the turn of the century, the 1900s. And he said, look, unless you give me a better piece of the land, because they hadn't discovered uranium in Namibia yet, and he didn't realize the true value of the farmland in Tanzania to the economy of Europe yet. So stuck with Tanzania and Namibia, which is mostly a desert, the Germans hit the ceiling. And when the Germans couldn't get a better deal on the African mineral resources, Germany went to war to find those resources in Europe. And where did they go? They went after what? Alsace-Lorraine in France. What mineral resources is there? or Alsace-Lorraine. The coal fields of Europe is in that part of France. They went for Poland. What is in Poland? The timberland of Europe is in Poland. And then they went for the Rhineland. What was in the Rhineland? The best farmland, or the breadbasket of Europe. That's what Germany did, because they cut Germany out of a significant piece of Africa, with French getting the cream of the crop and the British getting significantly next to the French. The Portuguese had Angola and Mozambique and the Guinea-Bissau and the Cape Verdes. So Portugal was sitting nice with its big sugarcane plantations and its mining and so forth. The British were sitting nice because the British ends up in Sudan, in Egypt, in Kenya, and Uganda, while the Belgians got the richest of all. Leopold, the king of Belgium, gets Zaire, or what was then the Congo, which was the center of mineral wealth at that point. And in all of this, the African is launching fierce resistance. These wars are lasting for decades, but it's not even called a war. Some great generals are born and die in these wars. Most of you, any of you, have you ever heard of a general called Tippy II? This is the man who led the resistance in Zaire against the Belgians. An enormous war being fought with bows and arrows against cannons and rifles. The extent to which they defended their territory is enormous to understand, and would have won the war had it not been for the death and the assassination of Abdallah, who was the leader of the Sudanese forces once commanded by Muhammad Ahmed, who's called the Mahdi. And Abdallah got caught blind at his back by the British and the Egyptians because the Ethiopians capitulated, and instead of defending the flag coming from the east, took money to stay neutral. And that was predicated on some funny relationships between the Italians and them, because Ethiopia had a Christian theocracy governing it, and the people they were fighting were Christians, so they found some brothership in this Christian relationship, and because of that, and it's being surrounded by Muslims, it capitulated and did not defend the back of the armies of Abdallah. While the French came down through Algeria, Niger, crossing to Chad to face Abdullah's forces, and the Belgians was coming up from the south, Abdullah and Tippy II had a good chance of crushing both forces if they could have gotten the Menelik family to defend the eastern portion of their country, of their land. But no one even talks to you about this war, or about these leaders, or about their accomplishments. And even with all of the weaponry of Europe, they were losing all over the place until they introduced what? What weapon was introduced into these wars? Huh? No, the gunpowder's already at play. That's what wins in slavery, the gunpowder. What? No, it was the Gatling gun.